Margaret had built her company from nothing over 25 years. She understood spreadsheets and board meetings and the weight of difficult decisions. But she did not understand why her 5-year-old daughter Emma had never spoken a word. The doctors had ruled out medical causes long ago. Emma could hear perfectly and her bright eyes showed she understood everything around her. She simply chose silence in a world that seemed too overwhelming to navigate with words. On this particular Saturday morning, Margaret decided they needed fresh air and sunshine. She drove to Willowbrook Park where she had played as a child decades before. The old oak trees still stood like gentle guardians over the playground, their branches reaching toward a sky painted with soft morning clouds. Emma wore her favorite pink dress with the tiny roses embroidered along the hem. It was the dress her grandmother had sewn before she passed away 2 years earlier. Margaret remembered how her mother had always believed Emma would speak when she was ready. Patience, her mother would say while brushing Emma's silky hair, is the greatest gift we can give a child. The playground buzzed with the familiar sounds of weekend family time. Children called out to their friends while parents chatted on nearby benches. Margaret felt that familiar pang of longing watching other families interact so easily. She settled onto a bench while Emma walked toward the swing set with careful steps. That was when Margaret noticed him. A man in his 40s with kind eyes and gentle movements was pushing a little girl on the swing beside the empty one. His daughter appeared to be about Emma's age with curly hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold. Margaret watched as Emma stood beside the empty swing looking up at it with quiet determination. "Hello there," the man said softly to Emma, "would you like me to help you get started?" Emma nodded once and climbed onto the swing seat. The man began pushing her gently just as he was doing for his own daughter. "I'm David," he said in that same gentle voice, "this is my daughter Sarah." Sarah smiled brightly at Emma. "I love your pretty dress," she said, "pink is my favorite color too." Emma's face lit up with a smile but she remained silent as the swings moved back and forth. Margaret felt her chest tighten with the familiar mixture of hope and resignation. She had witnessed this scene countless times before. Well-meaning children trying to engage Emma in conversation only to eventually give up when no words came back. But something different was happening here. David seemed to understand without explanation. He continued pushing both swings while sharing gentle observations about the morning. "Look at how the leaves dance in the breeze," he would say. Or, "I think those clouds look like cotton candy today." He never demanded responses from either child, simply offered his thoughts like small gifts they could accept or ignore as they chose. Sarah began singing a soft song her grandmother had taught her about sunshine and flowers. Emma listened with rapt attention, her eyes bright with interest. After several minutes Sarah stopped singing and looked at Emma with curious kindness. "Do you know any songs?" she asked. Emma shook her head but smiled to show she had enjoyed listening. "That's okay," Sarah said matter-of-factly, "sometimes I like to just listen too." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes at this simple acceptance. Most children Emma's age would have peppered her with questions by now. "Why don't you talk? Are you shy? Can't you hear me?" But Sarah seemed content to share the quiet morning without demanding anything in return. David began telling a story about a little bird he had seen in his garden that morning. It was a simple tale about how the bird had learned to trust him enough to eat seeds from his hand. "Patience," he said looking at both girls, "is how we make friends with wild things." Emma was listening so intently that Margaret could see her leaning forward slightly. Something about David's voice seemed to wrap around them all like a warm blanket. "My grandmother used to say," David continued, "that every living thing has its own special way of communicating. Birds sing and bees dance and flowers turn their faces toward the sun. People are like that too," he added gently, "we all have different ways of sharing what's in our hearts." Margaret found herself moving closer, trying not to interrupt but needing to hear every word. Sarah had stopped swinging and was now sitting cross-legged on the ground near Emma's swing. "My daddy's really good at listening," she told Emma. "He says listening is just as important as talking." Emma climbed down from her swing and sat beside Sarah on the soft grass. The two girls looked at each other with the kind of instant understanding that sometimes happens between children. Margaret held her breath, wondering what would come next. David settled onto the ground nearby, making a small circle with the three of them. "Would you like to hear about the garden Sarah and I planted this spring?" he asked. Emma nodded enthusiastically. David began describing their small vegetable patch behind their apartment building. He told them about the tiny seeds that had grown into tomato plants and how Sarah had insisted on talking to each plant every morning. Sarah believes plants grow better when you tell them about your day, he said with a smile. They do, Daddy, Sarah insisted. They get taller when I tell them stories. Emma's eyes grew wide with wonder at this idea. She had never considered that plants might enjoy conversations. Margaret watched as something shifted in her daughter's expression. There was a new openness there, a curiosity that seemed to be growing like those plants David described. Sometimes, David said very quietly, the most important conversations happen without any words at all. He looked directly at Emma when he said this and she seemed to understand completely. Like when you hug someone, Sarah added, or when you share your favorite toy. Or when you sit quietly with someone who's sad, David continued. Emma nodded solemnly as if this made perfect sense to her. Margaret realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not a breakthrough in the way doctors might measure it, but a moment of pure connection between her daughter and these gentle strangers. Emma, Sarah said suddenly, would you like to come see our garden sometime? Emma looked back at Margaret with questioning eyes. Margaret stood up and walked over to the little group. Hello, she said to David, I'm Margaret, Emma's mother. David, he replied, standing to shake her hand, it's wonderful to meet you both. There was something in his voice that told Margaret he understood more than most people would. Emma hasn't spoken yet, Margaret found herself saying, though she wasn't sure why. Some people are just more careful with their words, David replied simply, they want to make sure they use them wisely. Margaret felt a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying begin to lift from her shoulders. Would you like to exchange numbers? David asked. Sarah would love to have Emma visit our garden. And maybe Emma would like to show Sarah her room sometime too, he added, looking at Emma. Emma stood up and walked over to Margaret, taking her hand in that familiar gesture of trust. But then something unprecedented happened. Emma tugged on Margaret's sleeve, and when Margaret leaned down, Emma whispered something so softly it was barely audible. What did you say, sweetheart? Margaret whispered back. Emma looked at David and Sarah, then back at her mother. I want to see the talking plants, she said in a voice like morning sunlight breaking through clouds. Margaret's knees nearly gave out beneath her. Those were the first words Emma had ever spoken to anyone. David and Sarah smiled with such genuine joy that Margaret knew they understood the magnitude of this moment. The plants would love to meet you, Emma, David said in that same gentle tone. They're very good listeners too, Sarah added with wisdom beyond her years. Margaret exchanged phone numbers with David while Emma and Sarah sat together on the grass. She could hear them having a quiet conversation, though she couldn't make out all the words. It didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of Emma's voice mixing with another child's laughter. The sound she had dreamed of hearing for 5 long years. As they prepared to leave, David knelt down beside Emma. Thank you for sharing your words with us today, he said, they were worth waiting for. Emma smiled and nodded, then surprised everyone by speaking again. Will the plants remember me? She asked. Oh yes, David replied. Plants have excellent memories, especially for new friends. On the drive home, Emma chattered quietly about gardens and swings and her new friend Sarah. Margaret found herself crying happy tears as she listened to her daughter's voice filling the car. That evening, as she tucked Emma into bed, Margaret asked what had made her want to talk to David and Sarah. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then said, They already knew what I was thinking, Mama. Sometimes you meet people who understand you even before you use words, she continued with 5-year-old profundity. Margaret kissed her daughter's forehead and realized Emma was absolutely right. Some connections transcend language, some kindness runs deeper than conversation, and sometimes the most profound moments happen when we least expect them. In a playground on a Saturday morning where patience and gentleness create space for miracles to unfold naturally. Just as they're meant to be.